Welcome to the Phoenix Prosperity Podcast, where wealth meets legacy. Join your host, Tim Fergestad, as we explore the journeys of Phoenix's finest to success and beyond.
Hello, this is Tim Fergestad. Thank you for joining us. I'm very pleased to have Flynann Janisse with me here today. Flynn is the president and executive director at Rainbow Housing Assistance Corporation. Welcome to the show, Flynann.
Thank you so very much. Honored to be here.
All right. Well, why don't you start, please, by telling everybody what Rainbow Housing Assistance does?
Happy to do that. So Rainbow Housing is a national not-for-profit organization that provides social and economic services to low-income individuals, families, seniors, veterans, and the disabled across the country. So we're infused in the multifamily industry in the communities to provide free social services to the residents that live in those communities and qualify to live there.
Excellent.
And it ranges from education to gardening to bingo for social interaction for our seniors and create a space where they don't feel isolated, to social dynamics such as drug and alcohol rehabilitation, but primarily as a core competency, move people to a social and economic space where they can become self-sufficient.
Awesome. That's super, super important and valuable, and a very important niche of that industry. I had other people on the podcast recently who, I mean, it's one thing to try to feed a person, right, a fish. It's another thing to teach them how to fish, and that's incredibly empowering, which is great.
Yeah, absolutely. I think most important for us is to create a space of access, to create opportunities for people to tap those opportunities and move themselves forward.
Sure. And how did you get into this space?
So I have a long-term tenure in the affordable housing and market rate housing industry. So started very early at the age of 17 in the multifamily world, leasing,
Nice.
property management, asset management, and kind of moved through all of the stages of that. I don't think I really realized early on that I was providing social services to the residents that lived in the communities I served, but I absolutely
you were just naturally helping.
Right. I was just naturally doing that and wanted to ensure that people had a place to live and they could stay and live in those spaces. And when they encountered challenges, trying to support them in finding solutions. And I was very fortunate that our board president, Mr. Joe Sherman, came to me as I was an asset manager and said, I'd like you to lead our not-for-profit organization, Rainbow. And in that, I'd like you to expand the service platform across the country. So I was given the opportunity in 2007 to lead Rainbow and have been doing that ever since, and don't anticipate that I'll ever hang my hat anywhere else.
Nice. Okay. Excellent. Well, thank you for all of that. That's incredibly important stuff. And we, as a multifamily owner operator in different markets, there's definitely certain challenges in different regions of the country geographically, but also the demographics of different populations and different types of apartment communities and stuff. There are very different needs that they have. And so that's one of the things we try to do is we try to make them feel safe, right? And secure and clean housing, but also affordable housing. And that term, though, you don't want to throw that one around lately. A lot of what we do is we call attainable housing, right? So workforce housing. Affordable housing, for our listeners who may not know, generally means some sort of assisted or subsidized housing from state or federal sources. And can you talk a little bit more about that for how Rainbow Housing helps there?
Sure, absolutely. In many spaces, we're a general partner in the ownership structure of affordable housing, or as you had just mentioned, I prefer to say housing that's affordable. So that there isn't the stigmatism associated with it with those that just don't have an understanding of the dynamics of the platforms. But where we serve across the country is generally in communities that have Section 8 vouchers or they're LIHTC, so a tax credit community that really just has rent restrictions or income restrictions for the residents who apply to qualify to live in those communities across the country.
Okay, can you explain the differences between the LIHTC and Section 8 for our listeners?
Sure. So Section 8 housing is generally a platform where a resident or a candidate would apply, and based on their amount of income, they would qualify to receive a voucher.
And that's locally.
Right, locally.
Right.
So generally driven by a locale in each state. And then there are communities that are accepting of those vouchers. And in that acceptance of the vouchers, they would qualify to live in those communities where they may have a proportionate rent, or their rent may be 100% covered by HUD. Then the other LIHTC communities are such where they're tax credit communities, and really that's a benefit to the ownership structure. But the owner is responding to a need for that by that city or state that says we want to develop and operate affordable housing, or housing that is affordable in this particular locale for residents who qualify at this level of income. There are some terms, certainly, where 60% or 80% of the average median income is how you qualify. So if residents qualify or candidates qualify to live in those communities at those income levels, then they benefit from the established rents in those communities to be lower than other communities such as market rate housing.
Right, right. And so to break that down in an example real quick, let's say the average median income for a submarket is $50,000. 60% would be $30,000. If your income was that, then you would qualify. If you make more than that, you would not qualify. So, and some of those properties have different percentages of the tenants are required to be qualified to meet those criteria. Is that right? I don't know of any that have to be 100% assisted.
There are a number of communities that are 100%
Okay.
They may have some set-asides that are different. Having said that, just as you're describing, that can also be a qualification by the number of people who live in that particular household, and those income brackets adjust accordingly.
Okay. Okay. But so for our listeners, again, the benefits, can you list some of the benefits for taking lower rents and having those less affluent tenants in the property?
Sure. I think, the normal resident who meets those criterias many times looks just like you and I. They just may not have a barrier of a level of income that is higher than that 60 to 80% of average median income. So it's the general population, especially at the 80% income level. So
Right.
those are residents who really are working, and they have income enough to support a livable wage and be able to handle their housing and all of their immediate needs. Then there are also brackets where there may be what I refer to as such as set asides, where a certain number of units are set aside for those who are even at a lower level of income, so that they can have a quality of affordable housing to live in. And some of the benefits from a tenant perspective is such that there are mandates to maintain the housing, where it is safe and secure and clean.
Right.
And so that's
Those are annual reviews of the property?
absolutely annual or quarterly. A lot of times
Okay.
they're quarterly inspection as well. Certainly there are annual qualifications that an owner has to meet to ensure that the standards of a community are upheld. That's always a huge advantage. And sometimes that's one of the areas where there might be local businesses or political figures that don't completely understand the compliance component that an owner is held to. So these are really quality multifamily living environments for those who are at or below a livable wage, providing for housing that is sustainable for all.
Okay. Okay. And how many of those properties are modified or turned into a affordable housing center versus built as such?
Probably a lesser percentage. I don't know that I have a percentage for across the country or even in the state of Arizona, but I can tell you that where there is space to develop, so there's land still to develop affordable housing, it certainly is a competitive process. That's referred to as the qualified application process in every state. So owners and developers would qualify to build on any land that was available and likely in proximity to services such as hospitals, grocery stores, banks, conveniences to transportation. And then the preservation of affordable housing is probably a lesser percentage, but certainly something that is of interest to developers and owners to preserve affordable housing. So it may currently exist as affordable housing, and maybe a 10-year period of time is scheduled to lapse, and there might be owners and operators interested in purchasing that to sustain the preservation of affordable housing. I don't know that you see a lot of communities that are market rate or conventional that turn to affordable housing, but there absolutely is a desire for that because developer fees are high and they're profitable to preserve housing in that fashion if the county, city, or state is looking for an additional influx of housing that's affordable for those that live in those communities and geographic areas.
Right. Okay. And to explain a little bit more on the incentives for people to develop properties where they're probably not going to be charging as high a rent, because to build a brand new property is costs a lot, and you might as well build a nice one and charge premium rents versus lower rents and stuff because the costs are about the same. If you have to build new, there's a whole bunch of costs in the development process. So, can you maybe break down a little bit what some of the benefits are for the owner operators?
The tax credits are certainly the driving factor. So if a city, state, county is allowing for the development of affordable housing in that space, they'll offer tax credits to an owner to develop at those income levels for the population to be able to live in and thrive. So that's the primary benefit is the tax exemption piece or the tax savings. I say tax exemption, I'm going to say tax savings. The tax
Okay.
exemption is also a subsequent benefit. So where that's allowable, they can have real estate tax exemption when partnering with a not-for-profit or catering to a low-income population. And
Right.
certainly developer fee. So developing an asset for the benefit to solve for a challenge in a city, county, or state is one of the primary areas that an owner would desire to develop or preserve.
Okay, right. And we just partnered with a group in California. Well, they're based in California. They do a lot of their stuff in Texas, and they did just that, right? That's one of their sort of special sauces for making affordable housing and these sort of investments in this economic climate still a win-win for everybody. Is that exact strategy? Um, that's a Post Real Estate Group. Are you familiar with them?
I am not.
No. Okay. Um, anyway, they have probably over 80 properties in Texas or something. So they have
Very
a
good.
good chunk of their portfolio is there. Because property taxes are pretty legitimate in Texas.
Yes. Yeah, Texas is a great place to develop and preserve affordable housing. They have pilot tax programs, real estate tax exemption. They've got sales tax exemption, construction exemption. So it's definitely a space where if you navigate all those different platforms, it could be very profitable.
Okay. Now, Flynn, you sort of got into this coming from that space, right? Can you talk a little bit about what you were doing before you transitioned into Rainbow?
Sure. I would say that most of my career was in property management and asset management
Okay.
before 2007. And in
This was for a multifamily
multifamily,
investment firm.
uh, mostly multifamily asset management and property management organization.
Okay.
And in that space, I managed communities or multiple communities in my role and responsibilities, and then moved into the space of asset management. So just a higher level of oversight in those
Right.
communities. And then when I was approached by Rainbow and Mr. Joe Sherman, decided to make the transition.
Okay. Okay. And so that was trying to work with the property management and the asset management roles, just the next level of providing more value to all these communities.
Absolutely. I think moving into a space where you can really drive the impact of how an owner operates in a community in their service to the residents and the population as a catalyst for change.
Okay.
I was deeply interested in ensuring that people could have quality, affordable housing and not be faced with eviction when they had just a subsequent event, a flat tire, or something that would challenge them economically
Right.
to a space that they'd be evicted or have to move.
Right. Right. So can you speak a little bit about how uh, big Rainbow is throughout the country, and then what sort of your goals are right now for growing it?
Sure. So we are currently in 23 states across the country. We serve a little over
Wow.
240 communities. So the population that we serve is in excess of 90,000 individuals and about 53,000 households. Our goal is to really kind of tap the earth, be where we're needed to be called to serve in those spaces and provide quality services that allow resident populations to become stable. I think there's certainly an interest from owners and operators to have someone support that piece, but there's a grave need and a necessity to support the residents that live in those communities that are currently at a livable wage or below.
Right. Okay. So do you have any sort of initiatives or areas that you're planning to branch out into further next, maybe in the next 12 months, but also then how do you do that and the technical aspects to running this show?
I think our largest growth patterns are in Texas, California, Florida, and Washington. But we see a strong interest in Indiana and even Ohio, and most recently in the state of Michigan. So much of our growth is driven on where there's opportunities for owners and preservationists to capitalize on, including a not-for-profit or a 501c3 to leverage real estate tax exemption, sales tax exemptions,
Okay.
that particular component. But also, I would say that the driving force behind where we're solicited to serve is where there's a need for housing that's affordable, and when
Right.
a city or state is allowing those opportunities to be presented for tax exemptions, real estate tax savings, and certainly real estate tax credits through the LIHTC program. So
Okay.
most of those opportunities come to us where owners or developers have a compliance need or a requirement for a development that they're doing, or they have and desire to have a 501c3 not-for-profit involved in the structure to have some of those savings. For us, it really is just about moving in the direction and the needs that are dictated by the states. And as those are ever changing, be ready and present and show our proven ability to move at that pace to be able to support those components.
Okay. And well, the West Coast certainly has a need, and that's not dying down. They seem to keep creating a greater need with policies, which provides all sorts of challenges, yet opportunities, I imagine, for Rainbow to go in and help.
Yeah, agreed. I think many times there might be a struggling asset that's really just struggling to stabilize the tenant population in a way that how they respond will come full circle to the financial performance of the asset. So stabilizing that tenant population in that way is a really critical component and
Right.
area of expertise for us.
Okay. Okay. So, just tell us a little bit more about that. When and how do you start working with people? I mean, do they reach out to you? Do you have um, I guess, a marketing branch that sort of reaches out to places that you know are already struggling?
We do. So we have an outreach division of the organization, and that starts really even prior to contracting for services for us. So if we have an owner and operator who's interested in our services, then we will do what we refer to as a community scan. So determine the needs of that geographic area and that demographic that's in the community, and then tailor our programs and services in hopes of finding solutions for any needs that the tenant population has. And then the outreach of our organization and our arm is such that we'll reach out to every resident that we have contact information for or boots on the ground door knocking to say, what do you need? What do you want? What are your goals? What are your aspirations? And then if we don't have an internal path to find a solution for that, partner with local organizations that have proven ability to do so. So as an example, if there's a high population of mental health or disabled, we'll partner with an organization in that area that is highly skilled to support the solution for those paths to move everyone to self-sufficiency.
Okay, excellent. That's huge impact in people's lives. And you said over 50,000 households?
That's correct. Yeah, about
Wow.
54,000 households and a little over 90,000 individuals from school-aged youth and certainly infantile to seniors and disabled.
Excellent, excellent. And how have those numbers changed over the past decade, for example?
I would say that we are serving more seniors than we have in the past. Just over the course of the last 4 to 5 years, we've seen an influx of communities where we're serving the senior population in a more meaningful way. Certainly, the multifamily and family communities has always been a primary focus for us. That's where the LIHTC developments are at. That's where generally the Section 8 developments are at. So that's been our core competency, but we're expanding the breadth and the robust programs and services we provide to the senior population and veterans.
Okay, excellent. And um, What size properties are these? Just to give people an idea, do they range from very small to very big?
They do. So I think the largest we have is just over 700 units in Houston, Texas.
That's a big one.
It is. And then certainly rural development. So as small as 16 units across the country, many of that in New Mexico, in states that have smaller developments.
Okay, what's a smaller development? Are we talking about a couple of fourplexes or?
Yeah, I think 16 units would be a smaller development for us.
Okay.
Our hope is that those are kind of phased developments. So maybe it's an initial 16 units,
Right.
another 16 units in 5 years. That's the hope.
Okay. Okay. Now let's circling back to maybe when people would reach out to you. What can you give an example of somebody who could benefit from Rainbow?
Sure. And you're speaking from a resident or an ownership perspective?
Both. Both would be great.
All right. So generally, an owner will reach out to us kind of on three pillars. I have a struggling asset. I cannot meet the income required from the tenant population to really stabilize operations. That's a space. And then a secondary space would be where they have the ability to secure various different platforms for savings and development. From a resident perspective, the primary at this point in time is I don't have the funds to pay my rent and I'm faced with eviction. I don't have the funds to feed my family, and so I'm faced with these challenges with respect to food insecurities. Those are really primary aspects. And then
Right.
we see, there's a deeper dive to that. Why can't you pay your rent? Why can't you feed your family? And that's where we really dive into improving education and skill set development, as well as financial literacy, budgeting, and finances, and improving the livable wage. So employment services.
Okay. I imagine that requires a whole slew of affiliate connections.
It does. We've navigated very well to have internal skill sets and to have a level of expertise in prepping people to be employed and have the education and the skill set behind them to be a valuable employee in a community. Where we see the largest, I wouldn't say challenge, but opportunity is securing local businesses in those geographic areas to support the employment of these individuals. That's a lot of work to really navigate people looking at the tenant populations where we've improved their skill set and their education to be viable employees in communities.
Right. Okay. Excellent. And now back on the other side of the coin, there is the owners who are having trouble stabilizing the property, for example. They come to Rainbow and they say, yeah, help. Our debt service coverage ratio is in trouble. Our
Right.
lender's not happy. How do we right this ship? And how does Rainbow often provide help to them?
Sure. I think really understanding the tenant population's challenges. Are they suffering because there's a criminal element in the community? Is there lack of employment in the geographic area? Or is it that the tenant population lacks education and knowledge and skill-based learning to be able to move into a space where they can pay their rent on time and not compromise with vandalism or challenges in the community? So for us, it's really taking a deep dive and understanding what the tenant population needs that will come to a full correlation to the performance of the asset. And generally that comes to a space of income and education. How do I become a valued resident in
Sure.
community? How do I engage our youth in systems and programs that take them out of the very low level vandalism in the community? How do we move away from loitering and the criminal element in these communities?
Okay. I imagine some of that stuff can change really quickly, but I imagine in other parts of it takes some time. So can you talk about maybe the time frame that you are able to really turn around a property or to turn around a family?
Sure. I think we often talk about it's kind of peeling back the layers of an onion. How do we solve for the immediate needs of a family
Mhm.
so that we can get to the deeper issues and solve from a space that causes a material change? So it does take time. For some, they move through it faster than others. Maybe they've never had a support that they could lean into that could provide them access to opportunities. And others are somewhat unwilling because they've had poor experiences in the past. They really don't
Right.
process. And so that's more of a psychological space of really convincing them to trust the work that we do, to trust that we're there to support them and guide them and lead them and provide them with the tools to be successful. We generally will say that when we're infused into a community, it's about 9 months to start to see a material change. And
Okay.
that's community events, whether they be on site or be virtual engagements, really coming to a space where people are answering the phone when we're calling them, responding to a text message or an email. We cast a very wide net through a program we refer to as Link, which is leveraging innovative netted knowledge. And that's really just casting a wide net because the age range in affordable housing spans and has a younger generation as well. We have to have programs and services where individuals will respond to text messaging and they want to use an application and they want the instant access to supportive services. So really offering a broad approach to say, we're here, we'll meet you wherever you're comfortable. We understand your circumstances and we're not going to walk away from you and moving you through this process.
That's huge, right? Just first of all, being seen, but then also like seeing that you stick around and you're there to give that little extra support in all sorts of different ways is very important. That sounds like a lot based off of your size and demographic. What size of team is Rainbow now, and how much has that grown over the years?
We've probably grown fourfold. Certainly, we had significant growth during COVID. I often say that when people ask us, how's business? Well, business for us expands when people have greater needs. So it's an uncomfortable space to serve from because you're serving from a perspective of needs. But our organization has tremendously grown over the course of the last 4 to 5 years. Our staffing is just at about 100 across the country. And because of the nature of our platform and how we're able to share resources, we can keep that to somewhat minimal based on the impact of how we serve and the various different platforms that we deliver from.
Okay, so is there a center hub for Rainbow?
Yes, Arizona is the center hub. I would say
Okay.
we have a large population of staff in Texas that also supports us across the country.
Okay, and this can be geographical or not, just with the team spread out. But what are one of the biggest challenges for Rainbow, or maybe now or historically?
I would say historically now and probably what we project to be in the future. And that's really just building trust with the resident population to know and understand that we're here to help, that there is no charge for the programs and services that we offer. They're free to everyone who will engage with them. And then ensuring the commitment long term so we can actually move them through the processes. Sometimes we talk as an example that there's phase kind of outcomes, and gratification for what we do. GED is a perfect example of that. We know that it's a huge win if someone shows up to a GED program and is able to move through the math program itself and graduate that certificate. That's a win. But now they move to social studies, and if they are able to secure that piece, that's another win. Ultimately, it's the full GED certification. But each step is a celebration, certainly.
Yeah.
A path forward for everyone. We see that in drug and alcohol abuse as well. If we can get them to show up and then the next time show up for 15 minutes and then
little wins. Yeah.
They're absolute wins to move everything forward. So I think building the trust has always been, currently is, and likely will continue to be the space where we have the greatest degree of success is when someone says, I believe in you as much as you believe in me. So guide me. I'm fully committed.
Okay, excellent. Excellent. Can you talk a little bit about the goals for Rainbow moving forward?
The goals for Rainbow is always to live in the space where we work. So be present in the space where we can connect with the resident population in a meaningful way. And in that, we track a lot of data. So our primary goal is to reach 100% of the populations in every community that we serve in a way that allows them to become socially and economically stable. So it's a daily effort. Just this morning, of data to say, where are we at in some of the communities that just came on in the last 6 months? What are our objectives? How are we going to move forward through that? We have a marketing psychologist that we'll meet with that says, let's adjust the outreach flyers and marketing communication. If they're not responding to this, then we need to think differently. That's the space that I think we often find ourselves reinventing.
Okay. How often so what maybe percentage or is it more common for residents to reach out to you or to have property managers reach out to you?
Property managers reach out to us.
Okay.
That they quickly learn that the addition of a resident services provider is a benefit to them, and it solves for many of the challenges the industry of property management has always had, short-staffed, not enough time to door knock and become
Right.
familiar with the residents in the community.
Yeah.
This
Help create that a healthy community.
Right. This allows them to have a customer service arm, if you will, or an arm that is able to solve for challenges post-inspection. So if there's a domestic violence situation, if there's a hoarding issue, if it's just a lack of communication, many times being the property management team, you're the one who kind of lays down the gauntlet. You get to choose on a daily basis whether people stay or whether they go. And so that limits the communication many times that the resident population will have with the property management team. So offering the opportunity for us to connect with them in a different way.
A neutral party.
Exactly.
Okay. Okay. Rainbow is Switzerland. Okay.
Right.
Okay. Okay. And so where do the funds come to support Rainbow and their services?
So Rainbow is a third-party service provider. So in all instances, whether we're part of the general partnership in the ownership structure or where we're contracted to just provide resident services, there is a fee for service, generally that comes down to a dollar figure per door per month and annualized.
Okay.
We are paid to provide the services that we provide in each community that we're contracted to do so.
Okay. And let's say it's that Houston 700 unit one. Are you compensated by the number of residents that participate in the program, or is it like a contract for the whole property, all 700 at some negotiated rate?
Contracted for the whole property, typically by the number of units at a set rate on a monthly and annual basis.
Okay. And so you mentioned being a partner as well on those deals. Is that, it sounds like great alignment.
Yes.
But is that sort of, if you come into a property that's already running, do they assign you some of the owner's equity in the property as partial payment?
Our structure is such that where we're a general partner, we charge a flat rate annually of $15,000 with a 4% annual increase for the life of the relationship. And that's coupled with a fee for providing the provision of tenant services to the community. And generally that's negotiated at a per unit rate. A smaller community generally has a higher rate
Right.
per unit versus a larger community. And the provision of full services. If there is staffing involved, so we have staffing solutions where the owner may elect to have a part-time or a full-time on-site resident service coordination, then those staffing costs are passed on directly.
Okay. And maybe two in the case of that Houston property?
Yeah, in Houston, we have generally 4 to 5.
Wow. Okay.
On a weekly basis, there's a little over 300 people passing through our resource center for services in that community.
Wow. Nice. And is that, so do you set that up in sort of the leasing office area? You have their own office?
Yeah, it varies. That community, we're very fortunate. We received a donation some 12 years ago to build 4,400 square feet of social service space. So we were very, very fortunate there. In most communities across the country, it's in a community space. So the common area of the community, we may have a desk in a private area to be able to serve in that space and have functions. In our Link platform, that is all a remote delivery. So that's a team of individuals that reach out to those residents on a regular and consistent basis and connect with them remotely.
Okay, well, that's awesome. Incredibly impactful. This is what we strive for in our communities, right? Is to try to create a sense of community. We hold events and things. We just started. It's spring now, so we're doing pool launch events and things like that in some of our properties. But I love it. can't think of why most communities wouldn't want something like this, right? So
Yeah, I
any
think
way to
everyone
grow
wants,
the community.
right. Everybody wants it. It's a matter of the affordability of it, but everybody wants it. You're talking about pool events. We always say popsicles at the pool, coupled with a financial literacy event is powerful, right?
Right.
So get them to the pool, give them the popsicles, but to pass through the gate, we need to talk to you a bit about budgeting and finance and career pathways.
Yeah. You have to pass the arithmetic quiz to get into the pool area.
Exactly.
Nice. Okay. Well, appreciate you coming on. Can you maybe share a little bit of how people can connect with you and learn more about Rainbow?
Absolutely. Certainly can go to the website. So the www.rainbowhousing.org. And you can reach me at first initial F, last name Janisse, Janisse, at rainbowhousing.org as well.
All right. Great stuff. Thank you very much, Flynn, for sharing. Thank you, everybody, for watching and listening. And we appreciate you sharing your insights into the community side of apartment living. Thank you.
Thank you.
Inspired by our guests? Visit phoenixprosperitypodcast.com/guest and join us on the show and share your success story with Tim. The spotlight awaits.